Hi, my name is Amy Patterson, and I am the Special Education Data Manager for Kentucky Department of Education's Office of Special Education and Early Learning. We're here today to talk about recent updates to Infinite Campus, as well as reporting for the 2023-2024 school year. This is what we're going to talk about in today's presentation. We're going to cover resources. We're going to talk about the recent updates to Infinite Campus with the new forms for special education. We'll talk about reporting due dates, specific reporting requirements around indicators 11, 12, and 13, and discipline and exiting. And then finally, we'll talk about child count and personnel, which will be due in December. As we get started, the first thing I'd like to do is give a big shout out to my CEGIC members, my Special Education Advisory Group for Infinite Campus. These guys work so hard throughout the year to help me, especially with the updates that have occurred in Infinite Campus recently. And I couldn't do my job without them. I say that all the time. So I just want to share their names and recognize all the hard work they've done. A few of these will be updated in November, but for now, this is the team that I work with. We have a group from each of the CERTACs, as well as each of the RTCs, and then a couple of other people we've put on the team. These are the CERTAC representatives. These are the Early Learning Regional Training Centers representatives. And these are some additional members that we've added to our team to make sure we have everything covered. These are some resources that I wanted to let you know about. These are available for your use on our website at any given time. The first one is a special education data standards. These I would highly recommend that you check these out. They've been updated for the new forms, and I will be continuing to add to them. But they are very helpful for any data input, anytime you're updating student information or you're creating a special education form. These have all the information you need to know. We also have data standards for everything in Infinite Campus. So if you have a question about enrollment or discipline or anything like that, if you go to this all KDE standards link, data standards link, it will have all the information that you need for inputting data in Infinite Campus. We have a website called Special Education Resources for using Infinite Campus, and this is where we have our data standards. We also have our due dates for reporting, and we have the recent recordings that we've done and PowerPoints and any other resources that would be available, that are available for you for your use. We have the Dose One Stop, which contains lots of really good information for doses. And then we also have the Preschool Program Coordinator site that has a great information for preschool coordinators. And then I have a bookings page that allows you to set up a time to meet with me. I know I've been pretty busy this school year, and so this allows you to set up a time with me when you know I'm available, and we'll have that dedicated time so we don't have to be playing phone tag. Let's talk about the new forms in Infinite Campus. First, again, I'd like to thank CEGIC for all the hard work they put into this to ensure the best possible product we could get. There have been some questions recently that have popped up, and I am going to talk about those now. When Infinite Campus came to us to talk about changing the forms, one of the requests was that we make the Learner Characteristics Inventory, otherwise known as the LCI, only available if the student is being considered for the alternate assessment. There were several reasons for this, mainly because people were filling it out when it wasn't necessary, and it was causing lots of frustration from the teacher's point of view, as well as confusion by the parents because it was showing up in paperwork when it wasn't needed and those sorts of things. So what we did was we made the learner characteristics inventory marked as not needed when the IEP first opens up to be created. The LCI can be unlocked. What you'll have to do is go through the alternate assessment participation guidelines until you get to the point where it says, yes, all participation criteria are answered yes. The student is eligible to participate in the Kentucky alternate assessment. Continue with the documentation form below. Now, I know this says the student is eligible and you need the LCI to determine if the student is eligible. So what is going to happen is we are going to change the student is eligible to the student may be eligible to participate in the Kentucky alternate assessment. But once you check that box, it will unlock or change the LCI to not started. So once you click this box, you're going to click the cancel button at the very bottom of the screen, and that'll take you to the editor home, and that'll show you all the editors. And then you can click on the LCI to complete it. This is a screenshot of where you'll see that checkbox. This is the answer to where Infinite Campus looks to determine if a student is eligible for the alternate assessment. This is also where you need to check to unlock the LCI. Once you have checked that box, the learner characteristics inventory will now say not started instead of not needed. So you can click on the LCI and begin going through it. Another question that I've received multiple times is that sometimes people don't have the next and previous buttons when they're in a form. So right here, we only see the print button. If you look at the zoom feature, the zoom setting on the browser, notice it is zoomed to 150%. For some reason, that causes the next and previous buttons to not show up. So you'll need to go and change your zoom back to 100%, the zoom in the browser. That's usually in the upper right-hand corner, depending on the browser. So now notice the zoom is at 100%, and you can see the next and previous buttons, as well as an editor's button, which will, if you click that, will show all the editors on the right-hand side of the page. Now we're going to talk about reporting. These are the due dates for the 2023-2024 school year. Notice the due date for child count is December 11th. We debated this. We sought out feedback on this. December 1 falls on a Friday. And a lot of people expressed concern that they will need time to complete and finalize all special education documents, and that they probably won't be able to have them all done by 5 p.m. on December 1st if they have ARCs on December 1st. Therefore, we decided to make it so that you have an extra week and all documents that affect December 1 must be finalized by December 8th. The documents that affect December 1 are the IEP. The IEP must span December 1. The eligibility determination document. It also must span December 1. Must have been locked prior to December 1. And then the student must be enrolled on December 1. We will pull the final report on December 11th, and everyone will complete their survey on that day. I know that whole week in between is going to be difficult, but the reports must be pulled on a Monday. I have no control over that. That's how Infinite Campus works. So the final report has to be pulled on a Monday. So we decided to make December 11th the official child count date for this year. Other due dates that are coming up are personnel on December 1, that's due in GMAP. Indicators 11 and 13 spreadsheet is due on June 30th, along with the Indicator 12 data survey and the Safe Schools report. And the special education exiting data is due on July 31st. There's a lot more information on the special education reporting manual. This can also be found on our website that was referenced earlier in the presentation. The special education resources for using Infinite Campus website. This manual has any information you need to know for any of these reports listed above. Indicators 11, 12, and 13. The Indicator 11 report is the one that determines if the district has determined eligibility for a student within 60 school days upon receiving the consent for initial evaluation. The report we use for this is the SPED evaluation detail report. That's an Infinite Campus. Sometimes it does not calculate accurately for preschool because of the way preschool calendars are set up. At some point, when we can figure that out, we hope to be able to pull Indicator 11 straight out of Infinite Campus, but we have to make a few tweaks before we can do that. There are several questions that I get asked often about the SPED evaluation detail report. The main one is, what if the report shows that there is no date of consent for initial evaluation? This particular date does not appear on the printed version of the consent for evaluation document. So you have to unlock it to determine if this is missing or not. If it says it's missing, then you need to enter this date here. Another question I get asked frequently is, what if the parent revoked consent before we were able to determine eligibility? And I know that happens. So the best way to handle that is to put in the date of revocation of consent for evaluation in this text box here. That will show up on the report. It'll say date of revocation of consent. So you can filter out those students so you don't have to include them as part of your December 11 students you're choosing from. To go along with that, another column that is in this report is date of withdrawal. So if a student leaves the district before eligibility can be determined, that will also show up in a column in the report, and you can filter out those students as well. Indicator 12. This is the list of students who were referred from Part C, early childhood, to Part B, special education, in grades or from ages 3 to 21. Last year we did this as a survey, and I know it caused a lot of confusion, so I am working with our early learning branch, and we are going to provide a training in the spring. So be looking forward to that to help clarify some of the questions that you may have had on Indicator 12. For Indicator 13, this is secondary transition, and it requires that you pull a list of students with IEPs who are 16 years old or older to choose 10% of those students to put on the report on the spreadsheet that I send you. I recommend that you use the QA SPED detail report. This is probably the most up-to-date report, or you can run the December 1 count extract report and change the date to the day you're running it. I want to say about the indicators on 11, 12, and 13 in the discipline and exiting reports is that we will be doing an end-of-year training to cover any questions you might have about these. We'll be doing much more in-depth training on these. So now let's talk about discipline and exiting. When talking about discipline, one of the first things we want to do is remind everyone that it is required by law to report all disciplinary action taken against students in Infinite Campus. So these are the statutes and regulations for all the laws requiring reporting within Infinite Campus. In OSEAL, we look at restraint and seclusion, and we take a very, very close look at suspensions and expulsions of students with disabilities. One of the other really good resources that we wanted to point out is OSEP's discipline guidance. OSEP came out with this last year, and it completely backed up everything that we were training. So we recommend that you take a look at it. It has a lot of really good information. So to begin the school year, we just want to kind of go back to basics and talk about what is a disciplinary removal. A disciplinary removal is any instance in which a child is removed from his or her educational placement for disciplinary purposes. And that includes in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, expulsion, or interim alternative educational settings, removal by school personnel or by a hearing officer. This also includes informal removals, such as sending a child out into the hallway or to the principal's office. The most important thing I need to remind you is that for all students, especially students ages 14 to 21, it is required that any time they exit special education, whether that's transferring to another district or graduating or transferring to regular education, for any reason a student exits special education in your district, you must enter a special ed exit status and a special ed exit date in the special ed fields in the enrollment tab. And just to remind you, at the beginning of the year, there is a no-show report because a lot of times these students are overlooked. So any students with IEPs who are no-shows at the beginning of the school year, there's a report that you can run so you can go ahead and enter those special ed exit status and special ed exit date for each of those students now so you don't forget them at the end of the school year. If you don't have access to that report, you'll need to talk to your CASIS administrator to grant you access. A question I get often around exiting is about grade 14 students who are receiving an alternate diploma. There is information on this in our special education processes data standards. So that's a really good place to look. It goes into the details of how to code these students. But one thing I do want to mention is that we recommend waiting until the student leaves the district to not return to issue that graduation code or the G code. I know districts like to go ahead and grant that G code to the student at the end of 12th grade, and that's fine. However, remember that those students do not count as graduates, so they will affect your graduation data. So if they show up at the end of 12th grade and then they show up again on the exit report when they turn 21 or when they exit the district, it will affect the graduation rate both times. So we recommend that you go ahead and just end the school year with the CO1 until the student finally graduates. Then you can give the G2 code or whichever code you want to give, because technically the student did graduate at the end of 12th grade. They just stayed on afterwards. That's what we recommend, but it is not required that you do it that way. But just remember what it's doing to your graduation data. For special education, indicator 14, post-secondary transition, requires that all districts conduct surveys for students 1 year after they have left school. That's called we call that the Youth 1 Year Out, or the yo-yo survey. Tony LoBianco is in charge of that. He is with the Human Development Institute, and I will be providing a video that he recorded so you have more information about that. I'm going to talk about some questions we've had around least restrictive environment, also known as LRE, or educational placement. The questions that we've gotten quite a bit recently is, how is percentage of time calculated for the LRE? According to the file specifications for our federal reporting to the federal government, to calculate the percentage of time inside the regular classroom, divide the number of hours the child spends inside the regular classroom by the total number of hours in the school day. So that's bell to bell, when the bell rings in the morning until the bell rings to go home, and then multiply that by 100. Time spent outside the regular classroom receiving services unrelated to the child's disability, such as EL services, should be considered time inside the regular classroom. And remember that educational time spent in age-appropriate community-based settings that include individuals with and without disabilities, such as college campuses and vocational sites, should be counted as time spent inside the regular classroom. Another question that we've gotten quite a bit, and this is not new information, but we just want to clarify. After a lot of conversation, I, as the special education data manager, I've worked with the school readiness branch and technical assistance centers with OSEP. We've decided to remove the exception that was once in the data standard. That means you no longer need to calculate the classroom percentage of IEPs to determine if the classroom is a regular classroom or a self-contained classroom. The intent of the Kentucky's preschool program is to have inclusive classrooms that allow for students with and without disabilities to be educated together. Moving forward, you'll consider the entire program when determining if your program is a regular education program or a special education program. After that's been determined, you will place students based on that, regardless of the number of IEPs in the classroom. This allows for more flexibility in placement of students with disabilities, as the number of the IEPs in the classroom should not be the determining factor of the child's LRE. So just a reminder, the regular early childhood program is a program that is designed for typically developing children ages 3 through 5, and is not specifically or primarily designed for students with disabilities, and includes a majority of at least 50% of non-disabled children. This includes Head Start, state-funded preschool, private preschools, and group child development centers or child care. If a student is attending a regular early childhood program, they're to be reported in one of the boxes labeled 3A1, 3A2, 3B1, or 3B2. If a child attends a special education program in a class intended primarily for children with disabilities and does not also attend a regular early childhood program, this student should be recorded as a separate class or a 3S placement. If a child attends a separate educational program in a day school designed specifically for children with disabilities, it does not attend a regular early childhood program, this should be a 3U placement. If a child attends a special education program in a residential school or residential medical facility on an inpatient basis and does not also attend a regular early childhood program, this should be a 3F placement. Or if a child is not attending a regular early childhood program or a special education program, select the category of the program that best represents a specific environment. 3X is if the student is receiving services in the home, where somebody is actually coming to the home to provide services, or 3P, which is if the student is being taken to the service provider location. This is just a flow chart that may help explain the best way to figure out how to code a student. About child count now. This is sort of the focus of what we need to know for our December reporting. Each year, the Office of Special Education Programs in the U.S. Department of Education requires that states obtain a collection of all students being served under the IDEA receiving special education and related services. The date that Kentucky uses for the snapshot date is December 1. This data is used for many, many purposes, including calculations for indicators 9 and 10, significant disproportionality, indicator 4, but it's also used for funding purposes as well. So these are some things you should know. In order for a student to appear on Child Count, all of the following must be true. The student has to be enrolled in a district on December 1st. So that is an enrollment piece for general enrollment. Second, the student has to have an active and locked IEP in the district on December 1st. So it has to have begun before December 1st and end after December 1st. It could be on or before or on or after. The student has to have a completed, locked Kentucky Evaluation Eligibility Determination dated less than 3 years before the child count date, before December 1. So the evaluation eligibility determination document must be before December 1 of the current school year. Something that comes up every year when we're working on child count is that the students who, in order for the students to appear on the child count report, they must be actively enrolled in a non-excluded calendar. What that means is some districts use excluded calendars to house students, for example, in homeschool or in private school. But if those students are receiving services, special education services, and should be on the child count report, they must be enrolled in a non-excluded calendar. So you can keep them in that calendar, but also enroll them in a school that is non-excluded. One other note is that it's okay if the individual student enrollment is marked state exclude, but you don't have to do that. These are some common errors we often see with child count. The first main error is either an IEP is unlocked or the status, disability, or setting on the IEP is blank. We have a QA error report that is available to you, QA SPED error report, that you can run, and it'll tell you if any of these pieces is missing or if an IEP is unlocked. It's a very helpful report. It could be if the status is set to something other than A for active, AR for active referred, or I, which is inactive. If it's set to any one of those, then the student won't show up on the child count report. So, for example, if it's marked eligible parent refused, the student won't be on the report, so you'll have to change it back to active. For example, moves in from another state or if a student moves in from a district and for whatever reason the IEP and evaluation documents didn't transfer as editable documents, so they're in the system as PDFs, those won't show up on Child Count either. The Child Count report cannot read from PDFs. It has to be an editable document. If there is a student who is 5 years old and in kindergarten, but has an LRE code beginning with 6, those students won't show up on the report. And the opposite is true as well. If they're 5 years old and in preschool, they should have an LRE code beginning with 3. This is my annual public service announcement where I let you know that Infinite Campus is the authoritative source for all student information. So anything that is reported to KDE or to the U.S. government must be accurate in Infinite Campus because it is the authoritative source. So when you run your child count report, that would be the IDEA December 1 count extract report. These are some things you want to look for. First of all, students must be ages 3 through 21. Somehow, every year, we get students who are 2 years old. I don't know how it happens, but somehow they get past the report and show up. So the student must be ages 3 through 21 on December 1 of the reporting year. The age and grade should be an appropriate match. For example, a lot of districts like to use grade 95 or some other kind of non-graded grade for students who are maybe homeschooled or in private school but are still receiving services within the district. And those they might show up on your child count report, but they will be thrown out from my child count report, which means they won't be included when we report them for the federal government and for funding. So the biggest example I see is maybe high school students who are listed as grade 95. I will have to contact your district and ask you to change that in order for these students to show up. Just a reminder that preschool students should have an LRE beginning with 3. If they are ages 3, 4, or 5, they should have an LRE beginning with 3. Students in grades kindergarten through 14 should have an LRE beginning with 6. So if a student is 5 years old, their LRE should begin with 6. Please ensure that student demographic data is correct. I mentioned earlier that we use this data for all kinds of reporting. We use it for significant disproportionality and for indicators 9 and 10 and for indicator 4. So the demographic data must be correct because once it's reported, that's how we have to use it for the entire school year for every piece of reporting that we do. If you have any overlapping enrollments, please ensure that they are resolved. So if a student transferred from one district to another, please be sure that the enrollments don't overlap. These are the reports you should be running in Infinite Campus to help you with your child count reporting. The first one is the IDEA December 1 count extract. I recommend that you begin running that maybe sometime the end of next month just to see which students you have. Some districts start running it in August, but you want to make sure that all students are accounted for and that all data is accurate for those students. So you want to start running that early and often. This report is in real time, so if you make a change, it will show up the next time you run it. Another report that's helpful just for cleanup purposes is the QA SPED report, and there are actually three reports for the QA SPED report. There's a detail report, which will list all students who have IEPs. There's the error report that I strongly recommend that you run monthly, even at the end of the school year, so that you can make sure that all IEPs are locked and nothing is missing from the IEPs, so your data remains accurate throughout the school year, because KDE is constantly running reports that rely on accurate special education information. And then there's an aggregate report that just tells you the count of students that you have with IEPs. The Kentucky State Reporting, KDE reports, IDEA December 1 Federal Submission Validation Report is the report. It only updates on Mondays. Let me repeat that. The IDEA December 1 Federal Submission Validation Report only updates on Mondays, but it will provide a list of who we have at the state level on our report for your district. So if we were going to report December 1 count now, this is the students that we would have. So you can compare your report on Monday mornings to what we have and feel confident that our data are matching up. Another thing you can do with this report is, if you need to know the count for 2022, you can go back to 2022 and run that report, and it'll tell you which students were included on that report then. And then we also have an alternate assessment tracking report that is helpful, just so you know which students are allowed to be included on the alternate assessment. For the child count process, I recommend that you start running the IDEA December 1 count extract report that was mentioned on the previous slide early and often. So you want to start running that just to ensure that all students are accounted for, that all IEPs are updated, that all evaluations are completed, and that all students are accounted for. When you are feeling pretty confident that you have a handle on which students should be on the report and which ones still have you just have a few more ARCs you need to hold to complete your child count process, you can start running the IDEA December 1 Federal Submission Validation Report. This report basically just cycles through each of the districts and runs the IDEA December 1 count extract report for each of the districts. So this should completely match your report, except for maybe a couple of things. One, remember it only updates on Mondays. So if any changes you've made during the week will not be reflected on this report. The second thing is, if a student is dually enrolled in more than one district, if they have transferred from one district to another, or if they're dually enrolled within two districts, it will count the primary enrollment that was the most recent. So those are the only two differences between the reports. So the reason for this report is to show you exactly what we will be reporting for child count. If you want to go back to the December 2022 report, the Federal Submission Validation Report for last school year, you will see the exact students that were reported for your district. So it creates that snapshot data for you. So again, remember, it's actually going to be populated, I believe, beginning in October, and it will be refreshed weekly on Monday. Remember, it only refreshes on Monday. So I recommend that districts run the IDEA December 1 count extract for real-time data, because any changes you make will be reflected as soon as you run it again. But then as we get past December 1, remember, all special education documents must be completed by the close of business on Friday, December 8th. Now, if a student had an IEP on December 1st and you create a new one on December 2nd, as long as that December 1st IEP is locked and still marked active and still has all the pieces that are necessary, that student will still be on the report. Even any changes, any new documents you create after December 1st won't affect December 1st, as long as the December 1st documents stay intact. So all special education documents must be completed by close of business on Friday, December 8th. I will be sending plenty of emails about this. And then on Monday, December 11th, I would recommend that you compare the IDEA December 1 count extract to the federal submission validation report as early as possible and complete the survey, which you will receive a link for, to say, yes, this data looks good and we're good to go. Another collection that sort of takes place in December is the personnel and private school placement data collection. I will send you a spreadsheet that will allow you to store the information about personnel and private school students until you are to submit that data in the grant management application and planning system, GMAP, in June. So I recommend that you go ahead and store that information, because that data is as of December 1, and that way you have it done and don't have to worry about it at the end of the year when you're trying to go back and remember who was in place on December 1. Personnel data. The Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP, in the U.S. Department of Education requires that states report on all special education teachers, paraprofessionals, and related service providers that are employed or contracted to work with children with disabilities on the state's child count date. For us, it's December 1. You are going to report the full-time equivalent in each category as of December 1st. Full-time equivalent just means what percentage of a day are they working. So you have to report special education teachers as fully certified or not fully certified. Special education related services personnel, fully certified or not fully certified. And special education paraprofessionals for qualified or not qualified. For teachers, fully certified is anything but emergency certification. For special education related services personnel, each of those personnel have their own certification requirements, and you should go by those. For the paraprofessional, whether they're qualified or not qualified, you need to go by your district's policy as to what qualifications are in place for paraprofessionals. To report personnel by FTE or full-time equivalent, you're going to report the percentage of time each person works specifically with students with disabilities receiving special education and related services. For example, if you have a PE teacher that works with a student with a disability for 15 minutes a day, then you would count that PE teacher for that 15 minutes out of the whole day. So 15 minutes divided by however many minutes are in your school day. You're going to round to the nearest hundredth of a decimal place. If the teacher is working with both students with disabilities and students without disabilities, report only the portion of FTE spent specifically with students with disabilities. So for example, teacher 1 works with students with disabilities for 3 hours out of a 6-hour day on a regular basis. So this teacher is their time is dedicated to students with disabilities for 3 hours out of a 6-hour day. That would be a half FTE, or 0.50. Then maybe you have another teacher that works with students with disabilities for 4 hours out of a 6-hour day. Again, their time is dedicated to students with disabilities for 4 hours a day out of 6 hours. So that would be 4 divided by 6, which is 0.67 FTE. And then, so if you're reporting for the district, you're going to add teacher 1 and teacher 2 and get 1.17 FTE. So this is an example of what the personnel report looks like. I will send you a spreadsheet where you can store this information. You're going to break it down by ages 3, 4, or 5-year-olds in preschool. And then it also breaks down by fully certified or not fully certified. And then the same thing is true for students who are 5 years old and in kindergarten, or ages 6 through 21, who are fully certified or not fully certified. And then same is true with paraprofessionals and with each of the categories of related service providers. So I'll send you the spreadsheet. You can store this information in the spreadsheet, hold on to it. And then when GMAP opens, all you have to do is copy the information in out of the spreadsheet and paste it into GMAP, and that will be in June. To calculate the private school proportionate amount, KDE has to collect this information for child count and for students in private school who are eligible for services. So this is the information that I will be collecting. The spreadsheet looks just like this. It's an exact screenshot. And then you can copy that data over into GMAP when GMAP opens in June. So that's it for our presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, Amy Patterson, or Matt Coffey. And don't forget there's a link to my bookings page on an earlier slide that allows you to set up a meeting with me if email is not going to work. Thank you for your time, and please look forward to hearing from me quite a bit more over the next few months as we prepare for child count. Thanks.